won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. Nevermore shall I be the Grey Warder on Twitter and Discord. Welcome to the 35th episode of Podcast of the Dragon. Did you think I was done talking about Elayne? Hell no. We haven't had a chance to hear her think judgy thoughts about the king and Panarch. She also makes an interesting friend, makes an intricate plan, and makes an immense mess in the train wreck that is Tanchico. I think one of the reasons that Nynaeve and Elayne's trip to Tanchico is my favorite subplot in The Shadow Rising is because it's so layered. It's so layered for a storyline that at face value doesn't really have a lot of significance, at least not for this one book. We expect Rand's story to be layered, and of course the coup is layered because it's a tale of Aes Sedai, and anything to do with Aes Sedai is going to be circles within circles. And Perrin's story isn't layered at all because Perrin is simple, and maybe that's partly why RJ gave it a different flavor, the novel within a novel that he explores with that narrative. Elayne and Nynaeve's plotline could have been similarly simple, a basic adventure tale, a holding pattern, but RJ did so much more with it. As much as the Tanchico subplot in The Shadow Rising is the story of Elayne and who she is as a person, and her relationship with Nynaeve and how well they work together, and as much as it's the story of trying to find this until the very end unknown artifact that's dangerous to Rand and defeat the Black Aja, it's almost as much a continuation of the story of the Seanchan. They got pushed out by Rand about 8 months before at the debacle at Falma, but they've been lurking here this whole time with agents in place as well as people who were left behind. The wrap-up RJ gave the Seanchan at the end of Book 2 was anything but tidy, and we learned things during the rescue of Egwene, things about Suldam and Damani, things that in the midst of burning ships and explosions and the horn being blown may not have seemed so earth-shattering because there was something so very quiet and neat to Nynaeve hanging 2 bracelets on a peg, bracelets attached to leashes attached to 2 collared Suldam. But the implications were huge, and in Book 4, RJ begins to bring it all back into play. In Chapter 1, RJ uses the High Lady Suroth POV to set the stage for this whole Tanchican subplot. Suroth is staring out at Cantarin Harbor at all of the seafolk ships with their cut rigging, and then she turns back inside. It says, 3 women awaited her as she had left them. 2 kneeling, 1 lying prostrate on the bare polished floor, patterned in inlays of light and dark wood. The kneeling women wore the dark blue dresses of Suldam, red panels embroidered with forked silver lightning on the breast and on the sides of their skirts. One of the 2, Alwyn, a sharp-faced, blue-eyed woman with a perpetual glower, had the left side of her head shaved. The rest of her hair hung to her shoulder in a light brown braid. Suroth's mouth tightened momentarily at the sight of Alwyn. No Suldam had ever before been raised to the Sojin, the hereditary upper servants of the blood, much less to a voice of the blood. Yet there had been reasons in Alwyn's case. Alwyn knew too much. Alwyn is the angry Suldam who, in the Great Hunt, was waiting at the waygate with Suroth and Renna and the rest of the Seanchan when Liandrin and the girls come out. Renna manages to collar Egwene, but Nynaeve blows up a huge storm that allows her and Elayne to get away, and so Alwyn was angry and sulky riding back to Falma because only 1 Damani was captured and she didn't luck out. A little bit further it says, Suroth's eyes flickered uneasily to the 2 Suldam. She no longer trusted any Suldam, and yet she had no choice but to trust them. No one else could control the Damani, and without the Damani, the very concept was unthinkable. The power of Seanchan, the very power of the Crystal Throne, was built on controlled Damani. There were too many things about which Suroth had no choice to suit her. such as Alwyn, who watched as if she had been Seanchan all of her life. No, as if she were of the blood itself and knelt because she chose to. And then, a little bit further, as Surith is thinking about the reports she sends home to the Empress, it says, "Yet the Empress did not know everything. The worst could not be entrusted to any messenger, no matter how loyal. It would only be passed from Surith's lips directly to the ear of the Empress, and Surith had taken pains to keep it so. Only 4 still lived who knew the secret, and 2 of those would never speak of it to anyone, not of their own volition. Only 3 deaths can hold it more tightly." Surith did not realize she had murmured the last aloud until Alwyn said, "And yet the High Lady needs all 3 alive." The woman had a properly humble suppleness to her stance, even to the trick of downcast eyes that still managed to watch for any sign from Surith. Her voice was humble too. "Who can say, High Lady, what the Empress, may she live forever, might do if she learned of an attempt to keep such knowledge from her?" So the secret that as of yet is only being hinted at here is that the Suldam can channel the one power, and the 3 deaths that would hold this secret more tightly are those of Alwyn, the Suldam Seanchan who is here telling her you need all 3 of us alive, Rena, the Suldam who held Egwene's leash, and Sita, the Suldam who Nynaeve, Elayne, and Min kidnap, collar, and use as their leashed one decoy to sneak into the Damani kennels, and then leave collared next to Rena in Nynaeve's sentence of justice. Alwyn was the one who discovered Rena and Sita, and she only informed the High Lady Surith, and whether she did that from a sense of self-preservation because she too is a Suldam, or from a desire for self-advancement, or because she felt it was what was best for the Empire, Surith rewards her by raising her to her Seanchan and to her voice. RJ kind of hints later on that the fact that Suldam can channel is not the only knowledge Alwyn possesses too much of. Surith and Liandrin were rather indiscreet in their conversations in front of the Waygate about our master and how much we fear him, so Alwyn probably also knows or at least suspects that Surith is a darkfriend. But having introduced us to a handful of Seanchan in Book 2, and given us glimpses of their personal motivations, we've seen Seanchan totally devoted to the cause. Like High Lord Turek was 100% content with his place and desired nothing more. Surith is proof that there are darkfriends everywhere, and RJ shows us with Alwyn in Chapter 1 of this book that there are Seanchan who work entirely for their own self-interest, and where there is one, there are more. Surith could certainly kill all 3 of these Suldam who possess the knowledge that there is a fundamental flaw to the foundation of the Seanchan Empire, and I think the only reason she actually needs all 3 of them alive is that it would be too suspicious to have them all die. 3 mysterious deaths would set the Seekers looking at her, and Surith can afford that even less than the average member of the High Blood. So she shuts Alwyn up with an honored position that keeps her away from the bracelet, and we learn in Book 9 that Rena and Sita are never allowed to be complete again, which I think would be a dangerous enough resolution because of course all the other Suldam want to know why. Such a tiny thing for this empire to teeter on, and my number 1 disappointment in the entire series is that we never got the payoff for it. R.I.P. RJ. The first chapter in Tanchico, Chapter 38, is called Hidden Faces, and this chapter reacquaints us with the minor characters who populate this plotline. There are 4 POVs in this chapter, 2 Egyanan perspective sandwich narratives from Jacob Carradine and Liandrin, and while RJ is very straightforward with the Darkfriend part of the Tanchico plot, there are a lot of subtleties with the Seanchan storyline that make it a lot more interesting. Chapter 38 gives us our first look at Tanchico in the waking world, and RJ starts us out at the top. We enter in Egyanan's head in the most expensive wine shop in town, and RJ gives us a bit of third-person omniscient flavor at the start, with a feeling of being behind a camera on the outside and then zooming in, and it is coupled with one of the best maps in the entire series, or certainly one of my favorites. It's a very hilly city, the way that the topography is drawn with the sharpness of the ridges. It's southern, so it's probably really sunny, and with the city on the northern side of the bay, with its long peninsulas that stick in like little fingers, but on the south side, the way it sharply slopes down, and then has a clear strip to the water, it looks like there's gotta be some good beaches. It just looks like a really nice place. There's something exotic and attractive about it, even though we've been told that it's such shit. And it says, "The Garden of Silver Breezes was not a garden at all, but a huge wine shop, much too large to be called a shop, really, atop a hill centered on the Calpine, the westernmost of Tanchico's 3 peninsulas, below the Great Circle. A part of the name at least came from the breezes that wafted in where polished green-streaked marble columns and balustrades replaced one wall, except on the topmost floor. Golden oiled silk curtains could be lowered in case of rain. The hill fell away sharply on that side, and the tables along the balustrades gave a clear view across white domes and spires of the great harbor, crowded with more ships than ever. Tanchico needed everything desperately, and there was gold to be made, until the gold and time ran out." This is really great. It sounds rich and pleasant. It's a description to go with the map. So we see in this first POV that Elayne is dealing with Florin Gelb, the Weasley little guy that Rand jumps on when he hops onto the spray in Book 1 as he and Tom and Matt are fleeing Shadar Logoth. And so Elayne is obviously one of the agents that is scouting the way that we hear about from Suroth in Chapter 1. And she's great for a lot of reasons. We've only known her up to this point as the stern captain who slapped the shit out of Bail Doman for calling her Damani and Aes Sedai when she boarded his ship in Book 2. And then she stole his seal on the Dark One's prison and gave it to Turok, which is kind of dickish. But RJ is allowing us to observe her in a different light. Now we're getting to see that whatever their authoritarianism and their culture of cruelty, Seanchan are capable of thinking for themselves. And in having a free thinker in Elayne, it sets up a potential for the Empire to fall. So she's dealing with Florin Gelb. And I think that the only reason that RJ brings Gelb back is because it's early on in the story. If this were Book 7 instead of Book 4, I don't think she'd be dealing with Gelb. She'd be dealing with somebody new, a new character he would have invented just for this role, and he would give some backstory and make the character interesting, and you would get to know him for just a few chapters, and then he would disappear, and that would be the only time that we'd hear from him. But it's early on, and so he brought this character back in an attempt to limit the number of characters, because he had not yet got to the point of, fuck it, realistically, it would not be Gelb. It stretches credulity enough that it keeps being Bail Doman. In her interaction with Gelb, he gives her an Adam, and we learn that he has kidnapped women off the street, and in listening to her judgy inner narrative about him, we get an idea that she's looking for Suldam. And then she goes to leave, and RJ sinks the time for us. She sees the Seafolk Raker coming into the harbor, and she thinks to herself, I hate this job. I hate being an agent. I hate wearing a dress. I have to wear it to blend in, and it sucks. I want to be in armor. I want to be on the deck of a ship. This job sucks. And then she gets into her sedan chair and leaves. And we started at the top of Tanchico. We've seen a great view and enjoyed the heights where the hill falls away, vistas and cool air, and the city looking gorgeous, sun on the water, and I bet you can see those beaches. All of the luxury of an expensive wine shop. And now we get another description of the city. First we're in the heights, and now we're on the streets. And it says, worn was the only fit description for the milling masses, worn and frenzied, worn faces, worn clothes, and 2 bright, frenzied eyes. Desperate, hoping when they knew there was no hope. Many had surrendered, crouching against walls, huddled in doorways, clutching wives, husbands, children, not simply worn, but ragged and blank-faced. Sometimes they roused enough to cry out to some passer-by for a coin, a crust, anything. Elayne kept her eyes straight ahead, of necessity trusting the bodyguards to detect any danger. Meeting a beggar's eyes meant 20 of them jamming themselves hopefully around her chair. Tossing a coin meant 100 crowding in, clamoring and weeping. She was already using part of the money the courier boats brought to support a soup kitchen, just as if she were one of the blood. She shuddered to think what discovery of that overstepping of her place would mean. And so, He tells us here before he switches out of her character and puts us behind the eyes of Jacob Carradine that deep down Elayne is a kind and moral person, and she will risk a good deal to help others just because it's right. Acts of charity are something that only people of the blood are supposed to engage in, and the Seanchan are adamant about everyone remaining in their place, but she cannot just watch people starve and stand by and do nothing when nobody who is supposed to be helping is taking action. And that says a lot about her, even as so much of her thinking is Seanchan in its way and therefore dictated by the culture of cruelty that is Seanchan. Then we get into Jacob Carradine's head. We learn that the Forsaken still have his number, someone is continuing to carry out Ishamael's orders, or what Samael in Book 7 believes to be Ishamael's orders. Maybe it's Shider Haran's orders. It's certainly a smiling Myrdril in Book 3's prologue that tells Carradine his family members will be killed off one by one until Rand is dead. Whatever, Carradine is not having a good time. When we get in his head, we're still in the Garden of Silver Breezes. He's in a private room with a whole bunch of government officials. King Andric is hiring the White Cloaks as mercenaries under these vague conditions. They're never exactly spelled out because a new Panarch is being invested, and the king and his crew need the White Cloaks to help because they do not have enough control over the city and the populace. The city is chaotic. The streets are packed with refugees, people are starving, and everyone is discontent because imagine why. The Panarch-to-be is not popular, and therefore Andric needs the help of these soldiers that might as well be a mercenary body. In fact, Elayne, as she leaves and she looks at Jacob Carradine, thinks about the White Cloaks in a way that I have always loved and has always stuck with me. She thinks that the very concept of the children outraged her, a military body answerable only to itself, which is just beautiful. Jacob Carradine returns to the palace that he has appropriated, and lo and behold, Liandrin is there, and she calls him Bors, and we learn, oh, this is the dude who calls himself Bors. She reveals that she has the information that the White Cloaks are to take control of the Panarch's palace, and she tells him, once you take control, you're going to retain control of the palace after the investiture so that the Black Aja has soldiers that they're in charge of. She's like, you're going to send the Panarch's Legion away, and he's like, no, we're only going to take control of the palace for the time it takes to install the Panarch, and then we're going to leave, because otherwise she'll turn her legion against us. And Liandrin's like, we'll take care of the Panarch. The Black Aja needs someone to hold the palace for them, so they have the time to do the searching that they need to do. And we learn this because we switch to Liandrin, who returns to the rest of her darkfriend sisters and tells them that Carradine will hold the palace for them, but it was weird because he thought she was there to kill him for failing to kill Rand. And they discuss dissension among the Forsaken and how much it sucks to work for a company when your bosses can't agree on anything and you're never going to get the fat bonus you were promised if you all get fatally laid off due to their infighting. Liandrin is incredibly frustrated because everything is taking so long, and who doesn't get stressed out by waiting? It says, Eldrith, have you found a new clue in those pages? Eldrith. The plump woman gave a start, then stared around at them, blinking. It was the first time she had raised her head from the battered yellow manuscript. She seemed surprised to see Liandrin. What? Clue? Oh, no. It is difficult enough getting into the king's library. If I extracted so much as a page, the librarians would know it immediately. But if I disposed of them, I would never find anything. That place is a maze. No, I found this in a bookseller's near the king's palace. It is an interesting treatise on embracing Saidar. Liandrin set the pages, showering across the floor. Unless they are a treatise on the controlling of Rand al'Thor, let them be burned. What have you learned about what we seek? Eldrith blinked at the scattered papers. Well, it is in the Panarch's palace. You learned that 2 days ago. And it must be a ter'angreal. To control someone who can channel must require the power, and since it is a specialized use, that means a ter'angreal. We will find it in the exhibition room, or perhaps among the Panarch's collection. Something new, Eldrith. With an effort, Liandrin made her voice less shrill. Have you found anything that is new? Anything? The round-faced woman blinked uncertainly. Actually, no. It does not matter, Marilyn said. In a few days, once they've invested their precious Panarch, we can begin searching, and if we must inspect every candlestick, we will find it. We are on the brink, Liandrin. We will put Rand al'Thor on a leash and teach him to sit up and roll over. Oh, yes, Eldrith said, smiling happily. On a leash. Liandrin hoped it was so. She was tired of waiting, tired of hiding. Let the world know her. Let people bend knee, as had been promised when she first forswore old oaths for new. And The only other significant thing that we learn from Leandrin's point of view is that, like Nynaeve, she is also rude to service workers. She's a dick to the maid, which is awkward in the next book when she learns that actually it was Moghedien in disguise. But what we're getting as far as dark friendery in this plotline is very cut and dried. The dark friends draw Elayne and Nynaeve to Tanchico. They help facilitate the narrative, but it's obvious that RJ isn't invested in them, and that while they aid in moving this subplot, they are not its focus. We return to Elayne as the final point of view in this chapter. She gets back to her house, and lo and behold, inside is a Seeker, and this Seeker's name is Almarat Moore. He returns in Book 9, and he is a weird dude. I always feel like his role never got wrapped up as well as it could have been, but that is true for the majority of Seanchan arcs. But he's in her house, and she points a crossbow at him and gets him to identify himself as a Seeker, and then it says, "There has been some embarrassment over the return of Suldam deserters. Such desertions must not become common knowledge. Much better that they simply vanish." Only because she had a little time to think was she able to keep her face smooth. Suldam had been left behind in the debacle at Falma, she had been told. Possibly some had deserted. Her instruction, delivered by the High Lady Surith herself, had been to return any who could be found, whether they wanted to return or not, and if that was not possible, dispose of them. The last had seemed only a final alternative, until now. So he asks her a bunch of questions. They have a mildly contentious interaction because he's a slave with the power of life or death over her, and he makes sure she knows it. And once he's gone, Elayne goes into the basement, and it says, "A woman in a dirty dress sat despondently on a few rough woolen blankets, her head lifted at the sound of Elayne's steps, dark eyes fearful and pleading. She had been the first Suldam Elayne had found. The first, the only. Elayne had all but stopped looking after she found Bethaman, and Bethaman had been in this basement since, while courier boats came and went. 'Did anyone come down here?' Elayne said. 'No. I heard footsteps overhead, but no.' Bethaman stretched out her hands. 'Please, Elayne, this is all a mistake. You have known me for 10 years. Take this thing off of me.' A silver collar encircled her neck, attached by a thick silver leash to a bracelet of the same material that hung on a peg a few feet above her head. It had been almost an accident putting it on her, simply a means of securing her for a few moments, and then she had managed to knock Elayne down, trying a dashing for freedom. 'If you bring it to me, I will,' Elayne said angrily. She was angry with many things, not with Bethaman. 'Bring the Adam over here, and I will remove it.' Bethaman shivered, let her hands fall. 'It is a mistake,' she whispered. 'A horrible mistake.' But she made no move toward the bracelet. Her first attempt at flight had left her writhing on the floor upstairs, racked by nausea, and had left Elayne stunned. Suldam controlled Damani, women who could channel, by means of an Adam. It was Damani who could channel, not Suldam, but an Adam could only control a woman who could channel. No other woman, and not a man. Young men with that ability were executed, of course. Only a woman who could channel. A woman who had that ability and was collared could not move more than a few steps without her bracelet on the wrist of a Suldam to complete the link. Elayne felt very tired, climbing the stairs and locking the door again. She wanted some tea herself, but the little the Seeker had left was cold, and she did not feel like brewing more. Instead, she sat down and pulled the Adam out of the jute bag. To her, it was only finely jointed silver. She could not use it, and it could not harm her unless somebody hit her with it. Even linking herself with an Adam that far, denying its ability to control her, was enough to send a shiver down her spine. Women who could channel were dangerous animals rather than people. It had been they who broke the world. They must be controlled, or they would turn everyone into their property. That was what she had been taught, what had been taught in Seanchan for 1,000 years. Strange that that seemed not to have happened here. No, that was a dangerous, foolish line of thought. Tucking the Adam back into the bag, she cleaned the tea things to settle her mind. She liked tidiness, and there was a small satisfaction in making the kitchen so. Before she realized it, she was brewing a pot of tea for herself. She did not want to think about Bethaman, and that was dangerously foolish too. Settling herself back at the table, she stirred honey into a cup of tea as black as she could make it. Not calf, but it would do. Despite her denials, despite her pleas, Bethaman could channel. Could other Suldam? Was that why the High Lady Surith wanted those left behind at Falma killed? It was unthinkable. It was impossible. The yearly testings all across Seanchan found every girl who had the spark of channeling in her. Each was struck from the rolls of citizens, struck from family records, taken away to become collared damani. The same testings found the girls who could learn to wear the bracelet of the Suldam. No woman escaped being tested each year until she was old enough that she would have begun channeling if the spark was there. How could even one girl be taken for Suldam when she was damani? Yet there Bethaman was in the basement, held by an Adam as by an anchor. One thing was certain. The possibilities here were potentially deadly. This involved the blood and seekers, maybe even the crystal throne. Would the High Lady Surith dare keep knowledge of this sort from the Empress? In Book 9, in Ibudar, we learn that Bethaman ran at Falma because before Alwyn found Rena and Sita, she did. And you hear in her internal narrative that she had always suspected she could channel. She had always thought that she might be able to see the flows, and when she saw two of her peers collared, she knew that if she did anything but run, she'd just be a collared damani named Bethaman, and not a Suldam anymore. And so she fled. And this seeker that we first see in Egianan's home comes to Bethaman and tells her to spy on Egianan, and because everybody has something to lose, and everybody cares more about themselves than their precious empire, Egianan and Baal go to Matt for help, and Matt ends up getting the 3 Suldam that he needs to sneak the Aes Sedai, to sneak Teslin and Jolene and Edicina out of Ibudar. So one of the great things about Egianan is that she just thinks refreshingly rebellious thoughts. The Seanchan are portrayed as the type of authoritarian society where everybody drinks the Kool-Aid, and you can't even think treasonous thoughts. It's very 1984, and so having her think those thoughts is just great. She's considering the dynamic between her and the Seeker before he leaves and they're having their interaction, and she's thinking about how he's a slave, and yet he has tremendous power over her. And it says, under the law, he could have her put to the question under his own authority. By law, he had the right to send her out to buy the rope to bind her while he put her to the question right here, and he would expect her to return with it. Flight from a Seeker was a crime. Refusal to cooperate with a Seeker was a crime. She had never in her life considered any criminal act, no more than she had considered treason against the Crystal Throne. But if he asked the wrong questions, demanded the wrong answers, the crossbow was still close at hand and Cantarin was far away. Wild thoughts. Dangerous thoughts. And the chapter ends with, touching the crossbow, still lying there with its lethal bolt, she realized that something else was certain. She was not going to let the Seekers kill her, not just to help the High Lady Surith keep a secret. Perhaps not for any reason. It was a thought shiveringly close to treason, but it would not go away. Having a Seanchan that is not a blind follower, and most importantly who is capable of selfishness, is vital. RJ, by showing us free thinkers and selfish people among the Seanchan, is giving us an inevitable setup where, added to the knowledge that Suldam can channel, the obvious payout we were supposed to get, but sadly never did, was major cultural change. He's showing us this mighty empire is not inexorable. If a Suldam will run to save her own skin, if a ship captain takes advantage of freedom to think for herself, then more Seanchan can pull their heads out of their asses, and an authoritarian state cannot function if people won't follow blindly. Unless, of course, good people do nothing while shitty things continue to happen. There's always that. But Egianan is logic-minded. She is too logic-minded to be a blind follower. She's in a place where she's like, what I was taught doesn't add up to what I see here, does not compute. And so she's in a state of crisis, and she wants more information because that will help her make decisions. Exactly what decisions, even she isn't sure, but I'm guessing if she were willing to parse it out, it would be whether or not to commit acts of treason. So she's got these slimy dudes who are looking for women for her. They're looking for Adam for her. She has herself set up as a trader of information, so she's like, I've got to spread more coin to these guys, because she wants to find another Suldam to learn if she too will be held by an Adam. And that is how she ends up crossing paths with Nynaeve and Elayne. Elayne and Nynaeve arrive in Tanchico, and they're presumably disembarking as Egianan is talking to the Seeker, maybe even as she's still in transit, and it depends on how far from the wine shop her house is, since she sees the raker coming into the harbor just as she tells Gelb to fuck off. They've got all their shit, and they're on the dock, and they're being bracketed by Tom and Julin because there are a lot of sketchy-looking people around. And they run into Baal Doman. It says, A pleasure to see you again, Nynaeve said coolly, but if you will excuse us, we must find rooms in the city. That will be hard. Tanchico do burst its caulking. I do know a place where my word may bring something, though. I could no remain longer in Falma, but I do feel I owe you some debt. Doman paused, frowning with sudden unease. Your being here. Will the same happen here as in Falma, then? No, Master Doman, Elayne said when Nynaeve hesitated. Of course not, and we will be glad to accept your help. She half expected some protest out of Nynaeve, yet the older woman only nodded thoughtfully and made introductions among the men. Tom's cloak made Doman's eyebrows rise. For an instant she almost thought it looked as though he recognized the Gleeman, but Julin's Terran garb brought a frown that was returned in kind. Neither man said anything, though. Perhaps they could keep the animosity between Tyr and Elayne out of Tanchico. If they could not, she would have to speak firmly with them. Doman talked of what had happened with him since Falma as he accompanied them down the dock, and he had indeed done well. A dozen good coasting ships the Panarch's tacksmen do know about, he laughed, and for deep water they do know. He could hardly have acquired so many honestly in so short a time. It shocked her to hear him speak so openly on a dock full of men. I do smuggle and make such profits as I never did believe. 1/10 the amount of the excise, and the customs men's pockets do turn their eyes and seal their mouths. 2 Tanchicans in those veils and round hats strolled past, eyes clasped behind their backs. Each wore a heavy brass key dangling from a thick chain about his neck. It had the look of a mark of office. They nodded to Doman in a familiar way. Tom looked amused, but Julin glared at Doman and the 2 Tanchicans equally. As a thief-catcher, he had a proper dislike of those who flouted the law. I do no believe it will last much longer, though, Doman said when the Tanchicans had passed. Things do be even worse in arid Doman than here, and it do be bad enough here. Perhaps the Lord Dragon does no break the world yet, but he did break arid Doman and Tarabon. Elayne wanted to say something sharp to him, but they had reached the foot of the dock, and she watched in silence while he hired sedan chairs and bearers, and a dozen men with stout staves and hard faces. Guards with swords and spears stood at the end of the dock with the look of hired men, not soldiers. From across the wide street along the row of docks, hundreds of defeated sunken faces stared at the guards. Sometimes eyes flickered toward the ships, but mainly they remained fixed on the men, holding them back from those ships. Remembering what Quan had said about people here mobbing her vessel, desperate to buy passage anywhere away from Tanchico, Elayne shivered. When these hungry eyes looked at the ships, need burned in them. Elayne sat rigidly in her chair as it jounced through the crowds behind prodding staves and tried not to look at anything. She did not want to see those faces. Where was their king? Why was he not taking care of them? RJ shows us a handful of great things here in these few paragraphs. He does more Tanchican world building. We've been prepared for a shit show from the beginning. Chaos in the West is mentioned from the end of Book 2, and we are told multiple times before they arrive that it's bad in Tanchico. Egwene gives us a glimpse when she's looking in the world of dreams and flying all over the place, and it's described as rotting and cracked, and Amis tells her there's evil there. And Elayne gave us a glimpse of how terrible it was, describing the worn and frenzied people as she's riding in her sedan chair home from the wine shop. But now we're getting it through the eyes of Elayne, as she's looking at the docks just packed with tired Taraboners and despairing Domani and anguished Almuth Planers. We're getting it through the eyes of someone who has way more empathy than Elayne, because she was raised in a culture of empathy and responsibility. The people in the streets make Elayne so upset. In Tyr, there was power to make the lives of the people better and give them what they deserve. Rand was working to decrease taxation and increase justice, and Elayne was able to actively aid him in the task with her practical knowledge. Here, she can do absolutely nothing but feel sad and helpless and angry. And while it's not the first time that she has felt that way, because she surely felt that way as she was watching the banks of Cairhien slide by with burning villages and occasional corpses while she and Egwene and Nynaeve were sailing down the Arun into Tyr in the last book, here she's not in a boat just watching it float on by. And these people have a king. They have 2 rulers and a legislative body. It's not just civil war and chaos with no one in charge. And so she is outraged. We also see Elayne taking responsibility here to reassure Doman that things will be all right. Nynaeve hesitates because, she doesn't know if it's going to be like Falma or not. Who fucking knows? But Elayne is not going to let someone worry who she feels a sense of responsibility for. She's supposed to be Aes Sedai. Aes Sedai are supposed to be in charge. One day she'll be a queen, and someone is seeking reassurance, asking, is it going to be like that? And she's like, absolutely not. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be okay. Nynaeve hesitates, and she immediately steps in. She's shocked to hear him openly discuss breaking the law. Elayne's not fussed about breaking rules, but laws, and particularly when they surround revenue that countries need to function. Laws are different than breaking rules. And Juilin glares, and she thinks about how Juilin has a proper dislike of people who flout the law as a thief-catcher. She doesn't think anything judgy about Tom looking amused at Bale's talking about how he has all of these illegal vessels, but absolutely considers Juilin's anger and his dislike proper. And we also see here Elayne's sense of fair play. Doman is saying, well, the dragon isn't breaking the world yet, but he sure broke Eridoman and Terrebonne, and Elayne's instinct is to be sharp. And partly it's out of loyalty for Rand, but it's also because blaming the chaos on him is hardly fair. She understands the delicate fluctuations that move countries, cultures, and history, just as she says when Moiraine is advocating for Rand attacking Elayne and tries to counter Nynaeve's statement of any war is useless by saying, it's not that I want Rand to start a war, ... and Elayne has to be like, actually, war is inevitable. The existence of Rand means that war is unavoidable. The situation of where we are in history means that war will absolutely happen. Basically, Moiraine just wants him to pick the war. Elayne likely thinks chaos in the West was inevitable. It was bound to be unstable post-Seanchan invasion. And then, add the dragon, kaboom. And because she knows the dragon as a person and sees him as a human being just as she is, someone who knows responsibility and duty and will at some point in the future have to make choices that will affect the lives of people, make leadership choices, the choices where it's who gets hurt and how much. And while her choices will affect a nation, Rand's affect the whole world. So she just feels like it's so unfair because it's a nuanced perspective against someone who is in the end just a person who happens to be the dragon and didn't ask for any of this shit. So a bit further on, we get to the inn and meet the innkeeper, who looks like Leandrin, and so they immediately give a start when they see her. It says, the woman, her name was Rendra, obviously knew Doman well. With welcoming smiles for Elayne and Nynaeve and making much over Tom being a gleeman, she gave them her last 2 rooms at what Elayne suspected might be less than the going rate. Elayne made sure she and Nynaeve got the one with the larger bed. She had shared a bed with Nynaeve before, and the woman was free with her elbows. Rendra also provided supper in a private room, laid out by 2 veiled young serving men. Elayne found herself staring at a plate of a roast lamb with spiced apple jelly and some sort of long yellowish beans prepared with pine nuts. She could not touch it. All those hungry faces. Doman ate readily enough, him and his smuggling and his gold. Tom and Juilin showed no reticence either. Rendra, Nynaeve said quietly, does anyone here help the poor? I can lay my hands on a good bit of gold if it would help. You could donate to Bale's kitchen, the innkeeper replied, giving Doman a smile. The man avoids all of the taxes, yet he taxes himself. For each crown he gives as the bribe, he gives 2 for the soup and the bread for the poor. He has even talked me into giving, and I pay my taxes. It do be less than the taxes, Doman muttered, hunching his shoulders defensively. I do make a very healthy profit. Fortune prick me if I do know. So, of course, Nynaeve is as upset as Elayne about the state of things. Suffering makes her angry. She might be shitty to service workers and not believe in tipping, but she would happily use White Tower gold to help desperate people and feed as many as possible, because of course she would. And we also learn here that Bael Doman is a good egg. He's ripping off the government by not paying his taxes, and then he's using the money for services that the government should be providing. So, good. A bit further, Nynaeve asks him for help, and she's really open about why. She's just sort of like, we're hunting the Black Aja, and she's kind of shitty when he's reluctant to stay for a trauma that is similar to Falma. She's like, why don't you be a man? And Elayne, who is always ready with a bucket of water to deal with all of the fires that Nynaeve lights, thinks Nynaeve was being too hard. She always had to bully people. Elayne smiled and leaned over to put a hand on Doman's arm. We do not mean to browbeat you, Master Doman, but we truly may need your help. I know you for a brave man, else you would not have waited for us as long as you did at Falma. We will be most grateful. You do this very well, Doman muttered, one with an ox-driver's stick, the other with a queen's honey. Oh, very well. I will help as I can, but I will not promise to remain for another Falma. It would be comical that Doman thinks the good cop, bad cop was something the 2 women did on purpose, except if I were Elayne, I would not be amused. 5 days later, Elayne and Nynaeve meet Elayne. Chapter 46 is called Veils, and it starts from Elayne's point of view as she is following Florin Gelb and a whole bunch of his men that he's got with him, because he's planning a kidnapping. And it says, he had found 3 women since she sent him the gold he had asked for, none more than casually resembling any on her list, and had whined over every one she rejected. She should never have paid him for that first woman he snatched off the street. Greed and the memory of gold had apparently washed out the hide-flaying tongue-lashing she had given him along with the purse. Shouts from behind her pulled her head around and tightened her hands on the staff. A small space had opened up, as it always did around trouble. A bellowing man in a torn, once fine yellow coat was on his knees in the street, clutching his right arm where it bent the wrong way. Huddling over him protectively, a weeping woman in a tattered green gown was crying at a veiled fellow already melting into the crowd. So the Seeker is following her, and broke that dude's arm because he asked him for money. In Book 9, he makes it sound like Surith is his main target, but the tale that he tells himself and Bethaman, and eventually in Book 10 to Furik Karid, Tuon's Death Watch banner general, about Elayne conspiring with Aes Sedai and everything, and it ends up being like Tom's the main general / spy master in charge and whatever. It is so convoluted that even after dozens of rereads, I could not tell you what this fucker actually believes. And maybe Elayne made him suspicious because she was literally the only one properly following her orders, and so he was like, well, you're doing your job right, so there must be some nefarious reason why. I don't know. It's like having your entire secret police populated with QAnon assholes, and it makes me want to burn the entire empire down for sheer stupidity. Anyway, Elayne sees Gelb and his friends array themselves in doorways on either side of the street. And it says, so it was to be here, their abduction. Certainly no one would interfere, any more than people had when that fellow's arm was broken. But who? If Gelb had finally found someone on the list, she could go away and wait for him to sell her the woman, wait for her chance to see if an Adam truly could hold other Suldam besides Bethaman. However, she did not mean to face again the choice between slitting some unfortunate woman's throat and sending her off to be sold. So the woman she sent off to be sold was a Terrabonner noblewoman named Elayne. And Elayne is the name that she ends up taking for herself as her disguise after she flees Ibudar with Mat, and then Tuon ends up renaming her Elayne Shipless. But Gelb kidnapped Lady Elayne, and Elayne sent her back to Seanchan to be a slave because she didn't want to kill her. And those are the choices that she's faced with, and it's kind of shitty, but I don't know if she takes her name as a form of atonement, or what exactly, who knows. Anyway, Elayne and Nynaeve are attacked by Gelb and his men, and Elayne helps them out, and because Gelb is about to stab Elayne in the back, Elayne channels, and it is the first time that they have done any channeling since they've arrived in Tanchico. In fact, they've been walking through the streets trying to sense other people channeling, which is how they've been looking for the Black Aja. But to protect Elayne from being stabbed, Elayne smacks Gelb with air and knocks him backwards. And so Elayne gets for herself something better than Suldam. She, who has been thinking to herself how weird it is that Aes Sedai haven't made everyone their slaves in Randland like she was taught they would, gets women of the White Tower, who happily answer her questions as thanks for her helping them out. And she finds out that channeling can be learned, rather than just being something inborn, which allows her to work out for herself that Damani are born with the spark, and Suldam are the ones who can be taught. And that leads her to the choice to let Bethaman go. And presumably Bethaman gets scooped up again when Tanchico falls, and so all of the Seanchan who were kind of lying around are like, oh, yay, the Empire came back, we're so happy to see you. I'm guessing something like that happens, and that's how they all end up in Ibudar when we next see them. Elayne and Nynaeve invite Elayne back to their inn to have tea with them to thank her for rescuing them, and Juilin shows up and tells Nynaeve, I found the place where the Black Aja were staying. They're gone now, they left yesterday. And since we, the reader, already know what their next destination was, we know that they moved into the Panarch's palace. Elayne, on hearing that they're seeking people, offers to help. She's like, I trade in information, I can help you out if you're seeking people. And it says, you've helped out too much already, Elayne said hastily, remembering Nynaeve telling almost everything to Bael Doman. I am grateful, but we could not accept more. Letting this woman know about the Black Aja, and letting her become involved without knowing, were equally out of the question. Truly we could not. Caught with her mouth half open, Nynaeve glared at her. I was about to say the same, she said in a flat voice, then went on more brightly. Our gratitude certainly extends to answering questions, Elayne. Elayne is often content to follow Nynaeve's lead, but when she doesn't trust her judgment or ability to have tact or whatever, she will make a unilateral move. And while Nynaeve can be pissy about it, there's not the kind of resentment there would be for Egwene doing it, probably because she knows that there's no contention or pushback fueling Elayne's choice. Elayne didn't make the decision to say, hey, you've helped too much already, so that Nynaeve doesn't act like she's always in charge, or because Nynaeve thinks she knows what's best for everyone. Elayne just said it because she has reasoned out, you've already helped us, and we're not about to tell you about the Black Aja, and it's wrong to let you be involved without knowing. And so, while Nynaeve might be annoyed at Elayne's independent decision, it doesn't cause their whole dynamic to grind to a halt while they growl or glare at each other, because their relationship has such a refreshing lack of toxicity, and Jordan does a wonderful job of highlighting it in little moments like these. Then Tom comes in to tell them that the White Cloaks have taken the Panarch's palace and that Amathera is being invested despite the Assembly refusing her. Which of course the reader has been prepped for. If the Black Aja have left where they were staying and presumably moved into the palace, they can only have done so because it was seized by Jacob Carradine and his men. So that just adds more fuel to the civil unrest, which is what they're going to need to cover their escape. And they don't know that yet, obviously, but RJ is setting things up beautifully. The girls have walked into this tense situation, and he's been increasing the tension in such a way that the final climactic action will pull the trigger and make it so they will leave behind utter anarchy, or as close to anarchy as you can get in a place that technically has a government. We already know it's being prepped for the Seanchan. Elayne looks at the starving masses as she's heading home from the wine shop and thinks about how these people will never be able to resist the return. But RJ really does a great job in this subplot of making it so believably easy for them to take Tanchico in such a way that the populace will be almost happy to welcome them, and it will be conceivable that Tarabonner soldiers will loyally serve them, since the Seanchan cannot function as an effective armed force on this side of the Arath Ocean without local conscripts. After Elayne leaves, they are visited by Moghedien, who felt Elayne channel in the street when she used the one power to whack Florin Gelb so he couldn't stab their rescuer. Moghedien compels them and asks, hey, why are you guys here? And they say, hey, we're hunting the Black Aja. And she's like, oh, that's why I didn't feel you channel until today. That was probably smart when there's 11 of them and only 2 of you. I've been lying low too. I've been hiding out as the maid. And I'm not sure what to do with you, but you're too powerful to waste. And she just leaves after rifling through their pockets and purses and telling them, I thought you were my friends, but I was wrong. You invited me for tea, and we had a nice chat, and then I took off. I was not the droid you were looking for. And it says, what were we talking of when she came in? Elayne had just gone. What had it been? I remember what I was about to say. Nynaeve's voice firmed. We must find the Black Sisters without them suspecting, or we will never have a chance of following them to whatever this thing is that's dangerous to Rand. I know, Elayne said patiently. Had she said that already? Of course not. We have discussed it. RJ confines the girls to the inn for the rest of the trip, basically until it's time for their mission into the palace. The city is full of unrest, and it's too dangerous for them to go out and about on foot. So they have to stay indoors, and for the most part, the men have to go out and do their intel gathering. Which is fine in the sense of if Jordan is looking at all of his characters as soldiers with different specialties, Tom, Julian, and Doman's purposes are reconnaissance and acquisition of information. And the women are more like a combination of special operators and heavy weaponry. And from a military standpoint, it makes sense that you would not use such assets until it was actually time for the operation. Why would you risk them on intelligence gathering when you have other assets that are much more suited for that particular mission? Assets that are better at blending in, skilled at using more subtle weaponry, and have years of training in the task that they're doing. But because we're in the head of an unreliable narrator, we're seeing it through the eyes of a person who is frustrated that she can't go out and do something that she feels like she's perfectly capable of doing. And because, continuing in a military context, the women are the officers and the men are their subordinates, Tom, Julian, and Doman can't risk just telling Elayne and Nynaeve, yo, we're recon, you're special ops. Wait until we have the intel, then you'll get your chance to go. Because there's every chance that they'll be overruled by young officers who think they know better than they do. And maybe RJ knew officers who thought they knew better than they actually did when he was serving in Vietnam. In fact, it's quite likely he did. field officers tend to be young. They're perfectly capable of being stupid or taking foolish risks, and if these were two male characters instead of two young women, it wouldn't come across as so cringy and condescending that the men more or less manipulate them into staying in the inn. Elayne even thinks to herself that Tom says he's trying to find them a carriage so they'll be safer out on the street, but she suspects that he's not looking very hard. What makes it worse is that it always seems like Elayne and Nynaeve make a lot of stupid choices that are stupider than their characters have any right to make. And RJ has them make those choices for plot purposes, and then they require their stand-in warders, Julian and Tom, or later in the case of Elayne, her actual warder, Brigida, to help them out of ludicrous situations that they've gotten themselves into. And it doesn't have a good flavor to it. It comes across as patronizing at best and kind of sexist. And as far as the girls making stupid, crazy brave, poorly thought out choices and occasionally needing the men, or Brigida, who Matt even thinks to himself might as well be a man, to come in and rescue them, I just assume that RJ personally knew at least one incautious young officer who did foolish things and had an older sergeant who tried to redirect his energy and maybe had to save his ass once or twice. That's what I tell myself anyway. And because so much of the theme of this book series is one of power and role reversal between men and women, he didn't think too much of how it would come across, because if Nynaeve and Elayne were two young men, this would play out as here are two foolish young men who need these older men to help temper their impulsiveness before they get themselves killed. And instead of switching foolish young women for foolish young men, the flavor comes across more as women are stupid and need men to rescue them. And part of that is because we live in a patriarchal society, so we can't see it through the lens he was hoping we would see it through. But part of it is also RJ's fault, because we know perfectly well that neither Tom, Julian, nor Doman behaves the same way toward young men as they do toward young women, and if we were in Tom's head and getting his inner narrative instead of Elaine's, we wouldn't be hearing, I have to temper that young person's tendency toward dangerous impulsiveness. We'd be hearing, I need to protect that child before she gets herself killed. Which maybe is synonymous with that, but it sure has a much more patronizing flavor, and it would not be the same thing he would be thinking if it were Matt instead of Elayne, and it's unfortunate. We next see the girls 7 days later. Civil unrest has mostly kept them indoors. Tom, Julian, and Bail Doman, all three, discover the Black Aja in the Panarch's palace, and the fact that Elayne is Seanchan is revealed by Doman, and Nynaeve is not necessarily irrationally angry. I mean, I don't know, she seems like over-the-top angry, and that's partly because she likes Elayne so much, and because she likes her, she feels really betrayed, so her anger seems excessive, even for Nynaeve, but I guess it's rational. I don't know. Anyway, Elayne, who has a far less visceral reaction, is faced with the puzzle of how do you stop liking someone, particularly a Seanchan whose head doesn't seem so far up her own ass that she buys all of their bullshit. They all sit down to dinner, and Elayne joins them. They know the Black Aja is in the Panarch's palace, and their secrets are being openly discussed, so they can't let her go, and since she technically hasn't committed a crime, they can't ask Rendra, oh, can you lock her in the basement for us, because reasons? So they're just like, okay, well, we'll just keep her with us. And it says, Elayne decided it was time to add something of worth. I cannot see how the Black Sisters can be in the Panarch's palace without Amathera's knowledge, she said, pulling her chair under her. As I see it, that makes for 3 possibilities. 1, Amathera is a darkfriend. 2, she thinks they are Aes Sedai. And 3, she is their prisoner. For some reason, Tom's approving nod made her feel warm inside. Silly. Even if he did know the game of houses, he was just a foolish bard who had thrown it all away to become a gleeman. In any case, she will help them look for what they seek, but it seems to me that if she thinks they are Aes Sedai, we might be able to gain her help with the truth, and if she's a prisoner, we could gain it by freeing her. Even Liandrin and her companions could not hold on to the palace if the Panarch ordered it cleared, and that would give us a free hand to search. They go to bed with the men guarding their door, and Elayne gets a pallet in their room, and Nynaeve lies down to sleep because she's going to meet Egwene and tell Iron Riyadh. And there she talks to the wise ones like, yo, we really need your help, and so they tell her about Need. And she uses Need to find the domination bands, while also discovering Moghedien and having Brigida wave her down and be like, hey, yo, don't go after her, don't attack her, or you'll be real fucking sorry. But she gets a heads up that, oh, there's actually a Forsaken in Tanchico, as well as finding the bracelets and learning that Amathera is a captive as well, so she gets a lot of really good information in the world of dreams. In fact, it's one of the better world-building Teleron-Riyadh bits in this book, interestingly done from the point of view of someone who is not a dreamer, so I kind of like that. Anyway, Elayne is staying awake to look out for Nynaeve. Their standing policy is anybody who's in the world of dreams has to have a spotter. And Egianen is tied up with the power and laying on a pallet, and it says, Egianen lifted her head and looked over her shoulder. She hates me, I think. Go to sleep. Elayne stifled another yawn. You do not. Don't be too sure of yourself, she said firmly. You are taking this very calmly. How can you be so calm? Calm? The other woman's hands moved involuntarily, twisting at her air-woven bonds. I am so terrified I could weep. She did not sound it, yet it sounded the simple truth. We won't harm you, Egianen. Whatever Nynaeve wanted, she would see to that. Go to sleep. After a moment, Egianen's head lowered. An hour. It was right not to worry Egwene needlessly, but she wished that hour could be spent on their problem instead of wandering uselessly in Teleron-Riyadh. If they could not find out whether Amathera was prisoner or captive, set that aside. I won't puzzle it out here. Once they did find out, how could they get inside the palace with all those soldiers about and the civil watch, not to mention Leandrin and the others? So, Elayne feels a duty of care to Egianen, because she has a very strong sense of fairness. Nynaeve is super angry, because Egwene was one of her people, and somebody she was responsible for, and it was her self-imposed job to take care of her. And so the fact that Egwene was captured by the Seanchan and hurt and tortured and damaged in a way where Nynaeve could never fix it. She could never fix it. And it felt like their relationship was irreparably damaged after that because, Egwene was always a little bit broken afterwards. And so she's just so angry with the Seanchan because of it. So finding out that someone she actually really, really liked was one of them kind of fucked her up. But Elayne doesn't care that Nynaeve is so angry. She will stand as a shield between her and Egianen if she has to. Egianen is someone who helped them, and she will stand as a shield because she believes in justice and Egianen didn't do anything wrong. No matter Nynaeve's feelings, it's not reasonable and it's not fair. And admittedly, Egianen doesn't confess to them that she's the reason that they were originally in danger. She's the reason that they were being attacked in broad daylight on a street. But, Elayne sees the bigger picture, too, because she knows that someone like Egianen, who has already told them, yeah, I understand that the Suldam are the ones who can learn to channel, she knows that someone who knows the truth needs to return to the Seanchan. The Seanchan need people like Egianen, just as Elayne when Rand sends her Damani and Suldam captives after his battles with the Seanchan in Book 8, and she ends up getting Suldam who eventually agree that they can see the flows, and then insist that they must be collared for their own good, and the kin are like, what do we do with them? Her response is, send them back to the Seanchan, and the kin are aghast. They're like, they'll put collars on them, and she's like, yeah, and? Because she knows that that will work against the Seanchan from the inside out. This plotline basically ends with a heist, and everybody loves a heist. Nynaeve's trip into Teleron-Riyadh secures 3 crucial pieces of information. What the thing actually is that's dangerous to Rand, which they realize is a male Adam, whether the Panarch is an ally, dupe, or captive, and, oh yeah, Moghedien's here. This heist is going to be 1,000 times more dangerous than we thought it was going to be. RJ mostly shows us the trip into the palace from Elayne's point of view. He sends Nynaeve in to grab the bands, because she saw them in Teleron-Riyadh, and it makes sense for her to get them. It allows her to have her one-power grapple with Moghedien in the exhibit hall, and lets Moghedien villain monologue about the Domination Band and give us the information about their history and their weaknesses. And it's necessary to have Nynaeve establish a relationship with the Domination Bands because it provides a chain of custody of sorts. After the heist, she gives them to Bail Doman to drop into the sea, and when next we see him in Book 9, we learn that didn't go as planned, and unfortunately they're in Seanchan hands, and Nynaeve is with Rand in Book 11 when they come back into play, and she's there in Book 12 for the last that could be done. She doesn't witness it. She doesn't stand in the room when the band is put on Rand and he is made to choke Min, and then he reaches out to the true power and uses it to melt the necklace and bracelets and then balefire Semiraj, but she is there to deal with who Rand is in the aftermath and see how scary he is once he has reached the point where he is Quaindiar. But I'm going to go more in depth about Nynaeve's part of this adventure in another episode after I've gone through Book 5, because all of this is part of her arc. But suffice it to say that RJ sets her up for a number of significant story beats, including further conflict with her nemesis, Moghedien, so I'll just leave it at that. And I'm going to finish up where I started, by focusing on Elayne at the end of this plotline, and the things that RJ shows us about Elayne during the heist. So she, Nynaeve, and Egeanan are riding a cart into the Panarch's palace with piles of ice peppers. They're pretending to be women in from the country, day laborers helping out Bail Doman as he is bringing in gifts of ice peppers into the palace, and it says, "Dismounted white cloaks were questioning Doman. Here the street ran into a square behind the Panarch's palace, a much smaller square than the one in front. Beyond, the palace stood in piles of white marble, slender towers banded with lacy stonework, snowy domes capped with gold and topped by golden spires or weather vanes. The streets to either side were much wider than most in Tanchico, and straighter. The slow clop-clop of a horse's hooves on the square's broad paving stones announced another rider, a tall man in burnished helmet, armor gleaming beneath his white cloak with its golden sunburst and crimson shepherd's crook. Elayne put her head down. The 3 knots of rank under the flaring sun told her this was Jacob Carradine. The man had never seen her, but if he thought she was staring, he might wonder why. The hoofs passed on along the square without pausing. Egeanan had her face down too, but Nynaeve frowned openly after the Inquisitor. "That man is very worried about something," she murmured. "I hope he's not hurt." "The Panarch is dead," a man's voice shouted from somewhere across the square. "They've killed her." There was no telling who had shouted or where. The streets Elayne could see were blocked by white cloaks on horses. Looking back down the street the cart had just climbed, she wished the guards would question Doman more quickly. People were gathering down at the first bend, milling about and peering up toward the square. It seemed Tom and Julian had made a good job of seeding their rumors during the night. Now if only things did not erupt while they sat out here in the middle of it. If a riot started now... The only thing that kept her hands from shaking was her double grip on the cart bed. Light, a mob out here and the Black Aja inside, maybe Moghedien. I'm so frightened my mouth is dry. Nynaeve and Egeanan were watching the crowd growing down the street too, and not even blinking, much less trembling. I will not be a coward. I will not. So Elayne has been in very stressful situations before, and even participated in what was more or less a military action at Falma, engaging in a special operation in enemy territory to effect a rescue. But while the action here is similar in a lot of ways, the danger is so much greater, and the stakes are higher, and she compares her courage to the others, and because she can't see their fear, she assumes that they're braver. Elayne's job is to rescue the Panarch, if she's not accompanied by any member of the Black Aja. So once they have changed out of their countrywoman day laborer outfits to serving outfits, she grabs a food tray and with Egeanan makes her way to the Panarch's apartments, and it says, "Wonderfully, the hallway outside the Panarch's apartments was empty. No guards in front of the wide tree-carved doors set in a double-peak frame. Not that she had meant to retreat had there been guards, no matter what she had told Nynaeve, but it did make things simpler. A moment later, she was not so sure. She could feel someone channeling in those rooms. Not strong flows, but definitely the power being woven, or maybe a weave maintained. Few women knew the trick of tying a weave. "What is the matter?" Egeanan asked. Elayne realized she had stopped. "One of the Black Sisters is in there." "One, or more?" "Only one channeling, certainly." She pressed close to the doors. And a little bit later it says, "Then we must leave her," Egeanan said. "You can do nothing without warning the others of your presence." "Perhaps I can. If they feel me channel, they will think it is whoever is in there." Frowning, she bit her lower lip. How many were there? She could do at least 3 or 4 things at once with the power, something only Egwene and Nynaeve could match. She ran down a list of Andoran queens who had shown courage in the face of great danger, until she realized it was a list of all the queens of Andor. "I will be queen one day. I can be as brave as they." Readying herself, she said, "Throw open the doors, Egeanan, then drop down so I can see everything." The Seanchan woman hesitated. "Throw open the doors." Elayne's own voice surprised her. She had not tried to make it anything, but it was quiet, calm, commanding, and Egeanan nodded, almost a bow, and immediately flung open both doors. So Elayne masters her fear out of a sense of responsibility, not only to her future subjects, but to the people who came before her. She has to be brave because she's going to be the queen. And she lashes out and shields Tamila Kinderode and ends up knocking her unconscious from the power of the shield, and she rescues the Panarch. And she finds herself generally pretty unimpressed with Amathera, who's kind of an asshat. I mean, to be fair, she has been being tortured this whole time, and she flings herself on an unconscious Tamila and starts beating the shit out of her, and it says, Elayne, arms folded in front of the door, seemed ready to let it go on, but Elayne wove flows of air around Amathera's waist. To her surprise, she was able to lift her off the already senseless woman and set her on her feet. Perhaps learning how to handle those heavy weavings from Joran had increased her strength. Amathera kicked at Tamila, turning her glare on Elayne and Elayne when her slippered feet missed. I am the Panarch of Tarabon, and I mean to dispense justice to this woman. That rosebud mouth had a very sulky look. Had the woman no sense of herself, of her position? She was equal to the king, a ruler. Elayne has been upset with the rulers of Tarabon since she arrived in this city. She came here and looked at all of the miserable people and was like, this city is being failed by its governors. These people should not be starving. Why is the king not taking care of them? Why is the Panarch not taking care of them? And then they bring in the ice peppers and they go into the storeroom to switch clothes. And it says, rows of tall shelves filled the floor of the large room, laden with sacks and net bags of vegetables and large jars of spice. Barrels and casks stood everywhere, and a dozen dressed lambs and twice as many geese hung on hooks. According to the sketchy floor plan Doman and Tom had drawn between them, this was the smallest storeroom for food in the palace. This is disgusting, she said. I know Rendra keeps a full kitchen, but at least she buys what she needs as she can. These people have been feasting while... Hold your concern until you can do something about it, Nynaeve told her in a sharp whisper. She is absolutely outraged about this. She has probably been staring at this city the whole time since they arrived and mentally solving its problems and boiling with frustration that she can't do anything about it. And if there were this much food in her palace larders, these people would not be starving. She's thinking to herself that there would not be full storerooms of food in my palace because I would be throwing every resource that I had at the problem in order to fix it because of my sense of responsibility and duty and because I give a shit and because they are my subjects and these people are failing their subjects, and so she is just so fucking outraged. And when Nynaeve rejoins them outside, after her battle with Moghedien and getting the domination bands and barely avoiding being balefired by Gianna Cade, who has the black rod Terangriel that shoots out balefire, what Danny and Brett from the Wheel Weaves podcast call the balefire hose, which is the best name ever. Anyway, it says from Nynaeve's point of view. Nynaeve threw her arms around Elayne in a quick hug. I was so worried. Did you have any trouble? Not a bit, Elayne replied. Elayne shifted slightly, and the younger woman gave her a meaningful look, then added, Amathera did cause a little problem, but we sorted it out. Nynaeve frowned. Trouble? Why would she give trouble? Why would you give trouble? That last was for the Panarch, who held her head high, refusing to look at anyone. Elayne seemed as reluctant. It was the Seanchan woman who answered. She tried to sneak off to rouse her soldiers to harry the darkfriends, after she had been warned. Nynaeve refused to look at her. Do not scowl so, Nynaeve, Elayne said. I chased her down quickly, and we had a little talk. I think she is in perfect agreement with me now. The Panarch's cheek twitched. I am in agreement, Aes Sedai. I will do exactly as you say, and I will provide papers that should make even the rebels let you pass unhindered. There is no need for more talking. Elayne nodded as if all of that made sense, motioning for the woman to be quiet, whereupon the Panarch obediently closed her mouth, a trifle sullenly, but perhaps that was just the shape of her mouth. Clearly there had been some very odd goings-on. So, knowing RJ, presumably spanking was involved. Regardless, Elayne just doesn't have any fucking patience for this ruler. She's sort of like, I know how I would be ruling this country if I were in charge, if I were the Panarch of Tarabon, and you are not meeting my standards, asshole. A little bit later on, it says, when they reached the Three-Plum Court, it was scarcely less surprising to hear Elayne introduce the Panarch to Rendra as Thera, a refugee with no money who needed a pallet and maybe some work to earn her meals. The innkeeper shrugged resignedly, but as she led Thera away to the kitchen, she was already telling the woman what lovely hair she had and how pretty she would look in the right dress. Nynaeve waited until the rest of them were in the chamber of falling blossoms with the door closed before saying, Thera? And she went along. Elayne, Rendra will have the woman serving at table in the common room. Elayne did not seem surprised. Yes, very likely. Sinking into a chair with a sigh, she kicked off her slippers and began massaging her feet vigorously. It was not difficult to convince Amathera that she should stay in hiding for a few days. It really isn't that far from the Panarch is dead to death to the Panarch. I think seeing the riot helped too. She doesn't want to depend on Andric to put her back on the throne. She wants her own soldiers to do it, even if it means hiding until she can get in touch with the Lord Captain of the Legion. I believe Andric is in for a surprise with her. It is too bad he doesn't surprise her. She deserves it. Doman and Julian exchanged glances, shook their heads uncomprehendingly. Egiana nodded to herself as if she at least understood and approved. But why? Nynaeve demanded. You may have been upset because she sneaked off on her own, but this? How did she manage that anyway, with two of you watching her? Egianan's eyes flickered toward Elayne, so quickly Nynaeve was not sure she had really seen it. Elayne bent to rub the sole of one foot. It must have hurt. There was red in her cheeks. Nynaeve, the woman has no idea what the lives of the common people are like. As if she did. She does seem to have a true concern for justice. I think she does. Yet it did not bother her at all that there was enough food in the palace for a year. I mentioned the soup kitchens, and she did not know what I was talking about. A few days working for her supper will do her good. Does Elayne know what the lives of the common people are like? Who knows? She tries to. She's not afraid to get dirty or do her share. She'll go to the White Tower for study and wash dishes with no more complaint than a confession to her friend that she hates it and she never had to when she was in her palace in Camelin. But you can bet that she never half-assed it. You can bet that she did all of her chores in the White Tower, chores that she had never had to do before in her life, to the best of her ability, wanting to do them well because she has a sense of pride and a desire to feel like she's done her share. She doesn't think that she's too good to do anything. Even if she doesn't know totally what the lives of the common people are like, she doesn't feel herself any greater than a common person. She's a queen-to-be who doesn't feel any greater than a cook. And the proof RJ gives us of that is as the three women leave the storeroom in servant's garb, as they're getting ready to go and try to find the domination bands and rescue the Panarch. They come out of the storeroom, and they're yelled at by the cook. And it says, "You there!" Elayne and her companions froze at the shout. The dark-braided woman shook a long wooden spoon at them. "You come into my kitchen and stroll about as in the garden, you lazy sows, you! You have come from the breakfast of the Lady Ispan, yes? If you do not have it there when she wakes, you will learn how to jump. Well?" She gestured at the silver tray she had been laboring over before, covered now with a snowy linen cloth. There was no way to speak. If any one of them opened her mouth, her first words would show her no Terabonner. Thinking quickly, Elayne bobbed a servant's curtsy and picked up the tray. A servant carrying something was going about her work and not likely to be stopped or told to do something else. Lady Ispan? Not an uncommon name in Terabon, but there was an Ispan on the list of Black Sisters. "So you mock me, do you, you little cow, you?" the stout woman roared and started around the table, waving her thick wooden spoon threateningly. There was nothing to do without giving herself away, nothing but stay and be hit or run. Elayne darted out of the kitchen with the tray, Nynaeve and Egiana at her heels. The cook's shouts followed them, but not the cook, thankfully. An image of the three of them running through the palace pursued by the stout woman made Elayne want to giggle hysterically. Mock her? She was sure that had been exactly the same curtsy servants had given her thousands of times. Over the series, RJ puts us in the heads of countless nobles, people who are obsessed with house and status, and each and every one of them in Elayne's shoes would think to themselves what amount of respect was owed to a cook from a servant, and then adjust the curtsy accordingly. Elayne gives the same depth of curtsy, the same depth of respect that a servant gives to the daughter heir to the cook, and is utterly bewildered that the cook feels ridiculed. She can't fathom why she's mad. Clueless? Sometimes. Tone-deaf? Occasionally. But Jesus, she's nice. Of all of RJ's vast array of characters, if I could pick a single one to be friends with, I'd pick Elayne. I'd pick Elayne. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. This was one of my more meandering episodes, and I liked it a lot. It's probably going to be a while before I can focus on Elayne again, so I'm glad that I got a chance to really dig into her character because, as I said, I really like her. This episode's accompanying minisode on Patreon is about Egianan. I also really like her, and like Nynaeve, I feel conflicted about it. If you'd like to support the show and have access to that or other fun content, there's a link in the show notes. There are other links to my Discord, to my email, to the Watt Trivia and Games Discord, and to the Watt Fandom and Calendar Discord, and there is a link to my YouTube, which you should go and subscribe to, as well as to my Twitter handle, @podcastofthedragon. There is also a link to Apple Podcasts. If you could go and rate and review my show, I would really appreciate it. It will help other people find me, and so will word of mouth. So if you know anyone who likes the Wheel of Time and might be interested in a different kind of podcast, please tell them about me. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. My name is Morgan, and I feel that Elayne's criticisms of and general contempt for Amathera are mostly fair. That said, I'm on Team Eggianna when it comes to continuing to let her beat the crap out of Tamila.